Welcome to the Hero Front Podcast, the 2022 Veteran Podcast of the Year winner. I'm your host, Josh White, and I talk with heroes around the world to inspire, educate, and to remind you that you are not alone. My own personal journey was marked by struggles like depression and alcoholism, which led me to almost lose my life. Now, after years of working on myself, I'm now blessed to say I have an abundance of pride and purpose, and I have made it my mission to share and spread these lessons by having insightful interviews with inspiring individuals, emphasizing trust, transparency, and meaningful conversation to drive positive action in our lives. Above all, I aim to inspire you to unleash your inner hero. We all have it in us, and it's time to bring it to the front lines of our lives. Let's get after it. All right, welcome to the Hero Front Podcast, where we celebrate the resilience and triumph of extraordinary individuals from all walks of life. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Colonel Bree Fram, a trailblazing astronautical engineer and active duty officer in the United States Space Force. Not only is she a decorated leader in her field, but she's also a co-host of the groundbreaking podcast Forged in Fire, LGBTQ Leadership, where she and her colleague explore the transformative power of adversity in shaping exceptional leaders. Together with Liz Cavallaro, Bree co-authored Forging Queer Leaders, a compelling exploration into the intersection of LGBTQ identity and leadership development, showcasing how embracing diversity drives remarkable outcomes. From her pivotal role in space acquisition policy to her advocacy for LGBTQ military service, Bree's journey is one of courage, resilience, and unyielding determination. So today, we'll delve into several key talking points like inclusion, leadership philosophy, Space Force, trans-military experiences, and resiliency, because Bree's personal and professional journey is a testament to the power of resilience in overcoming obstacles and achieving success, inspiring others to persevere in the face of adversity. So join us today as we explore these topics and gain valuable insights from Colonel Bree Fram's remarkable story. Colonel Fram, welcome to the Hero Front Podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or not, but I have 3 random questions that I throw at you right out the gate that we did not prepare for or plan, and that's kind of like why it's fun to me.
Well, let's do it, because I'm always excited when I get to answer things where I'm surprised at what comes out of my own mouth.
I love that. All right, so it's called the Hero's Gauntlet. 3 questions before we get into the topics that you helped select. So first question, kind of putting myself in your everyday airman or guardian shoes. For someone to seek this episode out, I kind of imagine someone trying to educate themselves would fall into that category. So I was hoping on this first question, you could tell us the do's and don'ts of working with someone who's trans in case that person specifically is seeking this episode out for that kind of education.
That's a great question, and it's a tough one to answer too, because it's so context dependent. But my general do is treat someone like they're human, because there's a lot more to the story than just you're trans. For most of us, being trans is something that we've lived with for our entire life, and we may have like 7 or 10 or 30 aspects of our identity that come first. But when that topic comes up, it's coming up for a reason, because they need to learn, they need to share, they need to move forward in their journey. So to me, I think if someone comes out to you as trans, think of it as it's like an honor, because they trust you enough to share that. So maybe thank them for being willing to come to you, and understand that they think you're a friend. They think you're someone that is willing to understand and to listen. So let them lead the way. After you treat them like a human, let them lead. That's kind of the best thing to do. Listen, understand, and ask questions to build bridges, not out of curiosity. If you're totally just curious about the subject, Google it first. don't make that person answer all the minutia of what does it mean. You can do that work on your own.
Gotcha. So I think that's like you said, there's so many different situations, different people. It's kind of all about like where your heart's at,
Yeah.
when approaching the person, like what is your intention approaching this person and trying to get to know them. I think that is a great start. Have just seeing them as a human being, and letting them lead and letting them, building trust like any other relationship would be. And you're right, it's so easy to slap like labels on folks, and kind of miss everything else that that person brings to the table, right?
Yeah, when I describe my identity, it's I'm a rocket scientist, I'm a parent, I'm a wife, I'm a hiker, I'm a huge nerd, and then maybe I get down to number 9 or 10 and I just happen to be trans. So there are
Right.
all sorts of things I'd rather talk to people about, but because of how it's been portrayed and how we've been thrust kind of into the spotlight over our identity when it's really just something we happen to be, it comes up really frequently these days. But in a perfect world, let's talk about nerdy stuff and all that. And I'd much rather have that conversation if given the
Right.
opportunity.
And you love Star Trek, correct?
Oh, I am a total Trekkie, yes. But I do say if it's nerdy, I've probably tried it and I almost certainly enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I love how nerd stuff is like cool now. Like when I was a kid, like that would get me like chased by bullies. But luckily, for the kiddos today, it's kind of like the airmen today are like, yeah, I was watching this anime. I'm like, you can just openly talk about watching anime. Like, when I
Everyone's
was in
got a
high school,
fandom and a crowd
right,
to share it with.
right. I love it. Okay. Question number two. This is kind of broad. Okay. But what keeps you up at night?
Usually my children, if they're coming in and doing something crazy or wondering, why aren't you in bed? Go to bed. And why are you bothering me? But there's so many other things out there that sometimes are like, oh, I should probably get to sleep rather than thinking about this. One of which is what's our future? Because right now, for trans people serving, for me included, there's no law. There's nothing that says we guarantee having the opportunity to serve. It is by executive order, and a future president could flip that switch just as has been done 3 times in the past. So to have that kind of hanging over people, it's kind of a long-term dread. And we would love to see something that says, you know what? Everyone, not just trans people, everyone who has the ability to serve should have the opportunity to do so. So that's a big one from a very personal perspective. On the professional side, for me in the Space Force, it's how do we manage all this change that we're going through right now? How do we make sure that as we stand up a new service, build a new culture, that we don't lose sight of kind of our important core missions as we try and get it right around the edges and build the structures and the systems to put in place what we need to fight and win in the future. So that's a huge challenge of navigating a massive amount of change and trying to get it right, but realizing we probably won't and have to have that flexibility to keep changing and to understand where we need to go.
Yeah, I can only imagine like how much is on y'all's plate with a brand new service. Like you're kind of, creating history with the actions you're taking now. It's all an investment for the future Guardians.
Yeah, and
And
what an opportunity it is, though. I mean, how often does it come around that we get to build a new service? Every 3 or 4 generations, maybe? And for
yeah,
that to be now, to be living through that, to be part of it, I think that's an amazing gift.
it's amazing. And I just talked to Chief Abby Scott. He came to Eglin. He's in charge of like all the training and development for the Guardians, and he's such a sharp individual. So to have him at the helm over that program, I can't wait to see what he does with it. All right. Question number three. So, what are some new things that even you didn't know about the LGBTQ community through all the guests that you have interviewed on your podcast?
One of the biggest things we've learned and continue to learn is just how different and how broad the community is, and how there are some frequently shared experiences like coming out or transition for trans people. But the nuance shapes those stories in such interesting ways. And then add on top those other aspects of identity that we talked about, and you have just a fascinating plethora of stories. Like in talking with a gay African American man who was the first mayor of a large American city that happened to be gay, but understanding his sweep of history and how racial issues overlay some of those issues, and again gets to that issue of what aspect of identity is at the forefront. Like, are you mad at me because I'm gay, mad at me because I'm black, or mad at me because I'm left-handed? Where is that in some of those things? And understanding how those experiences play into someone's identity and how they see the world is truly incredible to understand.
I can only imagine the different perspectives and folks you've talked to. And, through researching a little bit about you, I came across the podcast. So I definitely subscribed. So I'll start listening to some of those episodes and I'll let you know my thoughts on them.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. I always have one bonus question that I ask for every veteran. And that is, what is the proudest moment of your military career?
Proudest moment of my career, hands down, is when two of my teams won Team of the Year awards, one on the classified side, one on the unclassified side, three levels up from my organization. And that was truly incredible to see what my folks had built and how they worked together. And this is while I was at the research lab, and we were doing some work to move technology from the lab to the battlefield directly, doing counter UAS work. And to see how those teams came together and truly took something that really wasn't normally done by the laboratory and produce it and develop it and take it to the field, show that it works, and realize the demand signal that the combatant commands were sending and make it happen. That was amazing. Just to see them win and get that honor, several levels up, amazing.
And when it gets that high, like it just all these people start visiting them and coining them, and they're on TDYs, and it is really cool to see them like kind of get treated like a Air Force celebrity a little bit, right? Kind of give them that special treatment that they deserved, and to see it is super special. So I love that you picked that. All right, so you got through the Hero's Gauntlet. You
All
did
right.
you did phenomenal. Okay, so here's some of the topics. Okay, we got why inclusion matters, LGBTQ plus leadership, Space Force, transgender military stereotypes and experiences, and coping with adversity. And so before we get into why inclusion matters, I was hoping you could kind of give us a little bit of an elevator pitch on who you are in case someone's listening that's not familiar with you.
Sure, happy to do that. So I have served 21 years in the Air and Space Force. I have degrees in aerospace and astronautical engineering, but don't ask me to build a rocket. It will probably blow up on the pad and probably do so multiple times. I don't know how it would do that, but it would probably have so many design flaws that that's where it would end up. Because my experience really has been in program management and systems engineering and making sure things come together in a way that I'm able to translate that to others and say, why is this important? Why should we be spending our money on some of these capabilities, or capability X instead of capability Y? And so learning to do that kind of shaped my experiences as a storyteller. If I could tell people why technology is important, then it ended up moving into telling people why taking care of people is important, and taking care of all people who want to serve is important. And really realizing that power of story has been why I've gone into writing books and having podcasts and really using people's story to get at all these other topics that we're going to talk about how we can build a more inclusive military where everyone feels welcome. So that's really a big aspect of what I do. While I'm a technology nerd and I love building the future of space capability, I'm also a people nerd and I want to understand what makes people tick, what motivates them, and how we can make sure they are able to bring their best self to work every day.
Absolutely. And that's so important to feel comfortable in your own skin, to be your best self, to truly build the trust needed for an effective team. So, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I've kind of grown to appreciate that as well. Okay, so let's hit this first topic then. Why inclusion matters. What's your thoughts on that?
There's so many ways we can approach this topic. Inclusion is a retention tool, and I think that's a huge one for us. Right now, you can say, well, we struggle to meet some recruiting goals. The Air Force and the Space Force are doing pretty well right now. But once we get people in the door, you have to keep them. And in order to keep them, you need to feel like you're part of the team. And if we don't build those inclusive environments, people are going to show up and then they're going to hit the door. And so to me, inclusion is one of the greatest tools that we have that is free in order to keep people around, to set the environment where people think, hey, I can share my idea. My contributions are valued. I am a member of the team like everyone else, and my leaders care about me because that's all what it's about, creating that feeling that we care about you. We want you here. So in one aspect, that is one of the most important things that inclusion does is it builds retention into what we do. And we as technological services need people to stay. We build a fighting force out of people that do multiple tours. There's value in that single tour person. I'm so thankful for them and what they gave to their country. But if we don't have people that stick around for 2, 3, 4, a career, uh, we don't have the force that we need. And that's all about being part of the team and having inclusion as part of that.
Yeah, I feel like, when we first joined, the Air Force was so much bigger. And they to treat this smaller force the same way, we can't do it. We gotta and especially the airmen and the guardians today. I mean, they just care about, being seen, being heard, their ideas, what they bring to the table. So like the old days, like when I was on the flight line, of people like, oh, shut up, Airman White. Like no one cares about what you think, kind of giving me a hard time. I'm kind of thinking those days are starting to slip away, with the quality of people we're getting is so high. They could easily just, do 4 years and get a job elsewhere now. So to invest in them, to build that trust with them is a huge component to recruitment and retention right now. It's something I think about all the time. I want them to hire me once I retire myself to like get on that, whatever that team's at, like put me on that team because I just have so much to say about it, from experiencing the past 20 years of my career.
Mhm.
Um, but they just appreciate it so much more now than ever before. Is that something that you've noticed?
I think so. I think what we're doing in the Space Force in particular is truly incredible in that regard, in that we are able to give that individualized consideration to people. And as our forces shrink and become more technologically capable and highly skilled, that becomes more and more important. As you said, when we were bigger, we didn't need to worry about it because if the 80% solution worked, well, if 20% of people walked out the door, no big deal because we still have a solution that worked for enough. But as we need to develop skill sets that are different, that where I need 2 or 3 people that know this thing, if I lose one of them, that's a disaster. So I need to be willing to work with people and provide developmental opportunities to build the skills that I'm going to need in small numbers and to do so where I'm not losing that person because I'm giving them reasons to stay. And to me, that inclusion piece is so critical to not have when you offer that idea, someone say, oh, you're just an airman or you're just anything. Your idea is not worthwhile here. No, that's that multiple perspectives that we need to create better solutions. And it's bouncing ideas off one another that you don't get to happen if people are afraid to even offer some of those ideas. So build that environment of psychological safety, and you're going to get better mission results on the back end.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay. LGBTQ plus leadership. So, if I had to guess, it would, what this means to you is leading authentically, being the best version of yourself. And I'm sure there's a lot of lessons in that community that directly transfer into tools you could use as a leader, in today's world. But would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, you're hitting on the topic of my new book, which is all about this, about what are those unique experience of LGBTQ plus leaders that really make them into leaders perfect for our modern environment. And the one thing I think we found more interesting than anything else is how many of these LGBTQ leaders develop this outward focus of leadership, that it's not about me, it's about the team. It's about all of you. It's about creating those developmental environments. And somehow they take those negative experiences that in our culture are often repeated in like a hazing environment where people think, oh, I went through some terrible things to get where I'm at, so I'm going to make you go through these terrible things. But instead, somehow the LGBTQ experiences lend themselves to saying, I went through some terrible things, so I don't want you to have to go through those terrible things. I want to set the condition so you can thrive and flourish without encountering the hurdles that I had to go through. And I don't claim that this is unique to LGBTQ leaders. Lots of leaders do this, particularly lots of minority leaders that have faced harassment or discrimination based on characteristics they can't control. But it's amazing to see the high percentage of LGBTQ leaders that really create this team-focused environment. The other aspect I would talk about as really kind of being quintessential to LGBTQ leadership is a knowledge of self. And having that ability to understand yourself is so fundamental to leading others. If you don't understand yourself and how you interact with other people, you just can't get there. You can't build the trust that is so critical in leadership. And so that experience that LGBTQ folks have of learning themselves and then showing themselves to the world is fundamental because it is truly a stand where you are saying, you know what? The world has already told me I'm one way. But despite all that I was consuming from other people's expectations, this is me. And I have to stand up for myself to make that declaration. And in many cases, to do it over and over again and to find that courage in everyday situations to come out, whether that's a picture on your desk of your family that is not what people expect to see, or if you're having a conversation with someone you just met and they say, well, where did you meet your wife? And you say, well, no, I have a husband. And that's not what the answer they were expecting to get. But you have that moment to make that decision. And sometimes it takes a lot of courage just to make those little choices in conversation.
You know what we all have in common is we're afraid to, show our real self. Like on some level, I feel like we all struggle with being vulnerable, showing our true self and how people will respond to it, right? That's something that we at our core as humans, we all have that on some degree in common. And I spent like the first 10 years of my career trying to figure out who I was. Had some skeletons in my closet I didn't deal with, and I ended up basically drinking way too much for the better part of a decade. And that didn't help. That didn't progress me. It was kind of like hitting the pause button on any self-growth whatsoever. So I was
Mhm.
like a chameleon. I would spot someone successful and then I would try to be that person because I truly had no idea who I was, what my values were. And flash forward to now after lots of work, some great people in my life. I'm honestly able to be who I am and feel comfortable in my own skin. And so I have a deep appreciation for what that feels like. The before me who was drinking all the time, who was trying to hide myself all the time, to the me now who is much more outspoken, um, and much more confident in my own skin. What you bring to your team when you're at that level is unlike anything that you've experienced before you made that choice. And so when you tell these stories of people, who are coming out to the world, although it's scary, on some level, I know how empowering that is.
Oh, absolutely. And there's actually a model of mental complexity where humans can go through kind of five stages in their life, two of which are childhood, where you're realizing how to interact in the world. But at the adult level, most people only reach what is known as the socialized stage. And that's where, you're part of a group. You have absorbed what the social environment is around you. You value your membership in that group. And it's important for those of us in the military. Value the identity that the military places upon us. You're a team player, a good citizen, that type of thing. But there's a couple steps above that. And the first one above that, that only about a third or maybe 40% of people reach in their life, is self-authoring. That's claiming your own identity. Despite what the group might say, you're like, no, I understand my values. And it sounds like you found this along your journey too, where you're like, this is who I am. The chameleon is over. Here's me standing up for myself. And that's where, the only one you're evaluating yourself against is you. And that's a truly amazing transformation. If you can go even beyond, and only a few people get there, it's about really understanding multiple viewpoints and holding multiple perspectives at the same time. The group, myself, others. How do I pull all that together and synthesize it? So we think some of these crucible moments, these challenges that LGBTQ leaders face, kind of give them a step up and get them to that self-authoring stage where you have to say, this is me, this is what I believe in, and I'm holding myself to these values despite what the group may believe.
Absolutely. And you as a leader, I mean, you're a colonel. You're in charge of a lot of people and things. With your own journey of finding, embracing who you are to the world, how has that shaped your leadership philosophy?
Uh, it's been amazing to come into my own authenticity. And though I was prevented from doing so by policy and by uh, circumstance, where if I let it slip who I was, I would have been thrown out of the military despite my proven ability to serve. So coming out and being my authentic self has been immeasurably valuable to me. But I say it's not something that is just me. It's something that everyone experiences. When you can be your full self at work, that's a gift to the individual and to the team. Because what we do when we're protecting our identity in some way at work, and we put that filter that sits in our brain between our thoughts and what we say or what we do, we're spending mental energy to keep that filter in place. It's like we have our shields up. If you want to give a Star Trek reference, shields up, I'm different at work. But when you take those shields down, you remove that filter, you all of a sudden have all this extra energy to dedicate to the mission, to the relationships that are so important. And in many ways, when you're authentic, this goes back to your early point about vulnerability. You're letting other people in. You're showing that you're human. You're building those pathways to connection. And that, for me, has been what's been so incredible since coming out. The connections that I've built, the networking effects that come from that. And by me sharing some of my joy, my authenticity, that often ends up getting reflected back. And that's truly magical when you just see smiles all around, when you've built that a true team environment where we're all focused on the right things, amazing things happen.
Absolutely. And so, while we're on the topic of your book, I was hoping you could also kind of give us a little bit of cliff notes on, what to expect when we purchase that book.
Absolutely, I'm more than happy to. It's broken up into three parts, and one kind of talks about the history of LGBTQ folks and overlays a model of leadership development. So there's a lot of information in there that's relevant to everyone, but gives you some of the story behind it as to how do we tie that to LGBTQ leadership. And the second part, we explore what are those unique experiences in LGBTQ lives that develop leadership skills, such as coming out, transition, and those things where you have to do that internal look and develop an authentic leadership style. So that's a really interesting look at how people grow and how they navigate really challenging moments in their life. And on the final part of the book, we look at how these skills can be leveraged at the workplace, and whether that's in the military, in academia, in business, or in anywhere. How can allies, leaders take advantage of some of these skill sets? How can LGBTQ leaders learn and understand from their developmental experiences and create environments where everyone can flourish? And then we really close with kind of a call to action. How do we get in this for the long game? Because this isn't something we're going to solve or do better at tomorrow. But there are ways that we can all take care of ourselves and make sure we keep fighting to make the world a better place for many years to come.
I love that. That was amazing. And I can't wait to buy the book myself. And like I said, I'm going to buy a signed copy from you. Being a podcaster, you talk to authors, authors and podcasts are like hand in hand, right? And at this point, I probably have 50 signed books. So I'm like, what? I'm just going to start collecting these signed books and I keep them all at work. And it kind of blows people's minds when they start realizing, looking through these books, that every single one of them are signed, including Colin Powell, including Simon Sinek, and folks like you. It's been a really cool collection that I never thought I would have, but yet I do have it.
Yeah, I can't imagine, you look at yourself as an 8-year or 10-year-old and you're like, what's the collection that I'm going to have? It's not going to be these baseball cards or these miniatures, whatever it is. Oh, it's signed books. And, as adults, we're like, oh, that's actually really cool.
When I was a kid, I'm into nerdy stuff too. I had the Magic the Gathering cards. I still got
Oh,
them.
so do I.
I have my collection from when I was like 10 years old, and I'm 39 now. I still have every single one of those cards in my garage.
Yep, they
It,
are in my basement, and I tried to get my kids to learn, and they're like, no thanks. I've got better stuff to do.
I love Magic. It has a special place in my heart to this day. Okay, so our third topic, pretty broad. It's just Space Force.
Well, we touched on some of this already and the opportunity we have to build a 21st century military service that does build in those individualized considerations for people, that is inherently developmental. But even beyond that, boy, do we have a cool opportunity to get after some amazing technologies and develop the future. Because for Space Force, we are that military service that the public touches on every day. It's not very often someone's going to pick up the phone like, I need to call the Army right away, or I need a ship from the Navy. But if anyone picks up their phone and navigates in their car to where they're going or uses their credit card, they're calling on a free service provided by the Space Force to the world. And if we think about war games and we think about a day without space, we almost throw up our hands and be like, give up. We can't do that. We can't have our modern way of life without space. And so to build that future as well as protect and defend what we have today is an incredible responsibility that we have. But our adversaries are moving quickly in these domains. Space is not a safe haven like it used to be in the past. We now have to absolutely prepare for wars that are going to extend into space and think about not only how do we protect and defend, How do we operate through? How do we reconstitute a force? How do we clean up space? Because anything in space that's moving 17,500 miles an hour is deadly. Even if that's a fleck of paint, that can ruin your day. So if we pollute, if we have collisions, what happens? How do we operate through that and clean up after that? So we've got amazing challenges to face, but we have incredible people who are thinking about all these things and how do we revolutionize what we do, not just to bring space capabilities down to Earth, but to extend them. We could also talk about the far future or even the near future. What happens when there is a murder on a commercial space station? Who's got jurisdiction over that? Do we act kind of like a Coast Guard model in space? Are we the law enforcement agency out there at some point? Or what happens when people go out and have a conflict on an asteroid that two different companies are mining, and someone sabotages someone else's equipment? Is that our job? We have to think about some of those things as we start talking about humanity moving out into the solar system.
I can't even imagine the talks that like happen in the Space Force. I mean, it's everything from I'm sure there's like physicists and how to travel through space quickly to how do we put a weapon in space? Can the enemy put a weapon in space? How do we defend against that? Can we land on the moon and put a base there? And then can we go to Mars and put a base there? Like these are all, I'm sure, talks that have been happening. So you probably work with some pretty fascinating people.
There are brilliant people everywhere. Although I will say the most brilliant people that I talk to are people that talk about taking care of people. Now, we've got technologists and they do incredible things, but it's our ability to put that together that's really going to matter and make a difference for us. But yeah, those water cooler conversations about the latest sci-fi show or what capability we need to bring in, how can we do that? That's a lot of fun to have, and we all dream. But really, the value of having a separate service that does this is that's what we're going to have people think about from the beginning of their careers. While we were still part of the Air Force and had some elements in the Army and the Navy and in other services, we would pop back and forth in different assignments. And you might go do something space related and then go work on aircraft or on electronic systems that are uh, part of something completely different. But now we can build people that always think about space and have that strategic mindset of how do we do things differently? When we operate in a world where a whole different set of physics applies, we need to think about it a little differently and build those skills.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited for y'all to see, where you take that program. It's really cool to see it unfold, real time. And how cool is it for you to, be serving as a colonel, a literal rocket scientist, in the Space Force? I mean, that is just got to be too cool for you. So I'm very happy that we have folks like you at the helm of this initiative. All right. Transgender military stereotypes and experiences. I feel like you got a lot to say about that. I'm very curious to hear some of the stereotypes that you've experienced, and some of the experiences, positive and challenging, that you've had to deal with.
Well, there are outlandish stereotypes out there about who trans people are. And really, the challenge is most people that hear those stereotypes have never knowingly met a trans person because so many of them are almost instantly broken if you meet someone and realize that they're human with the same hopes, dreams, desires as anyone else. But for trans people in the military, they're often incredibly exaggerated, even beyond that. And our popular culture for decades kind of built it in that we were perverts or cheats or in some way tricksters. That's you always saw we were the villains in movies and TV shows, always up to something nefarious. But for us, in many cases now, it's that we're broken or in some way incapable of doing our job. Or that for trans women like me, that, there's no way I could possibly return fire on the battlefield because I'd be too busy weeping or wondering about what I'm going to wear that night. Or that for transgender men, that they're steroidal rage monsters that are going to charge the enemy at the wrong moment and get everyone killed. But nothing could be further from the truth. Again, we're the same as everyone else in that regard. But it extends down to just thinking that we're incapable. In fact, I had a boss who I worked for about 6 months before he retired, and he called me into his office and he told me that I broke his stereotype of who a trans person was just by showing up to work every day and doing my job. And I had to think, you know what? That's a really low bar, but that's what's out there. And if that's all it took is me coming to the job every day, uh, it's pretty easy to break that. But it so often takes that one-on-one interaction, like, oh, you're a person. You like the same food that I do, or, maybe we cheer for the same sports team. Building those connections is so important, and it's really hard if you don't have someone in your life, which is also why storytelling is so important and why I've shared some of the books and the stories that I do, because we show people in every career field, in every rank, doing every mission all around the world, and show there's no one way to be trans. There's no one way to be trans in the military, but they're here, they're serving, they're doing the job, and everyone is capable.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, could you speak a little bit about the day that you still call it coming out, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you wouldn't mind speaking on the day that you came out, how that unfolded and what was on your mind, I think that would be a great time to speak on it.
So I came out on the day that the ban on transgender people serving in the military ended, and I was a major working at the Pentagon at the time on my first tour there, and I thought about going down to the press room where the Secretary of Defense was making the announcement. I thought better of it. I probably would have had to try and talk my way past a number of people to get into that room. So I stayed at my desk and I watched on closed circuit television. But when he was done speaking, I had a Facebook post that was ready to go to come out to the world, because at that point, only about 3 people knew that I was trans. And I also had an email to my colleagues in the office. And though I had written that ahead of time, I was ready to go. I still hesitated because I didn't know what the reaction was going to be when I hit send, when I hit post. Took me a couple minutes, but eventually I got the courage to send those messages out, and then I ran away. I went down to the gym buried underneath the Pentagon, and I like to say I went nowhere faster than I'd ever gone anywhere in my life with all the nervous energy I had on an elliptical machine. Again, thinking, oh my God, I did this. What now? How is life going to be different? But eventually, I did have to go back to my office and I sat down at my cube. And one by one, my colleagues walked over to me, shook my hand, and said, "It's an honor to serve with you." And I was absolutely floored. I was near tears because the honor was mine to work with all of those incredible people. And on Facebook, it was nearly nothing but love. And my friends, my family, it was just an incredible outpouring of support. But it was not all roses. My wife lost friends and family, people that don't speak with her to this day, merely over who she chose to love. And her parents even didn't speak with her for a year. The only communication we got from them was, "How are the children?" And that was it. And so there's still a lot of hurt from that. And that's kind of the calculus that a lot of people think through every time they're coming out. And some people have to do it over and over again. You think about, what's the reaction going to be? It's almost like earning a degree in risk management, because you have to think, how do I minimize the potential consequences? Is it safe? So for me, as a relatively senior officer at the time, being white, working in a nerdy career field, people still perceiving me as male, my risk was pretty low, most of which in the military because I had 15 years of track record behind me and I had that performance. And people could look to me and say, "Yeah, we've been doing this job together." Not everyone has that or has all those protective factors. But by and large, that's the experience that trans people had because they came out and people said, "Can you do the job?" And like, "Yeah, we can do the job. Let's do it." And that's where we moved on from there.
Well, that's amazing to be that, I mean, that's a rightfully so you were nervous. I
Mhm.
mean, once you make that decision, life is going to be different. It's out of your hands now, right? So I would have been on that elliptical too, had I made a decision that big. And so to come back upstairs and then, have people greet you with kindness and love, I mean, that had to have been just a memory that you'll never forget.
Absolutely not. I treasure that and the experiences that I've had since engaging and being open. And when I transitioned, I was in a command position, and my people threw a party for me, to see my new name on the door, and then just to have a little gathering, take some pictures, eat some cookies. What a heartwarming feeling. And that's what it's all about. It's about building those teams where we're there for one another. And because when we're there for one another, boy, the mission is going to take care of itself, and we are going to go the extra mile when we need to.
Absolutely. I mean, if they're willing to do that for you, if the time came to it and they really needed you to step up, I mean, at that point, you're not seeing it as just a job. You're seeing it as,
This is my
basically
this is
your
my
family.
family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that you don't want to let them down, these people down that have been there for you. So it kind of changes the whole dynamic of what you're willing to give.
Absolutely does. And I could not imagine being where I am now without the incredible support of so many leaders and colleagues and friends and people I've had the honor of leading along the way. It has been so heartwarming to see that and to feel that, and really does drive me to make sure we're creating those conditions for everyone else, for that 19-year-old airman first class that needs that in their life right now.
Absolutely. And it kind of I want to ask you about this too, which might be a little harder to talk about. But at some point, that decision that, gave you the courage to come out was revoked of some sorts, right? It puts you and many, many other people suddenly in this really bad spot. So I was hoping you could kind of walk me through how that day went and how you reacted to it.
Yeah, just a year after coming out, like a thunderbolt out of the blue, uh, tweets came from President Trump to announce that transgender people were a burden and a disruption to the military that shouldn't be allowed or tolerated in any way. And you have to think, did my commander in chief just try and fire me via tweet? And what do I do in this situation? And in a weird way, almost an ironic way, I look back and I say, thank you, President Trump, because there was all of a sudden this spotlight on our service that hadn't been there before. And when the tweets came out, about 50% of people, both in the military and in the American public, thought we should be able to serve. But now there's this spotlight that shows a couple of the things we talked about, that trans people were serving and accomplishing the mission all around the world in all different circumstances. And public opinion and opinion in the military started to change because we told our stories. We showed those things. And the way we actually reacted to the tweets was, you know what? What can we do? We can lace up our boots, put the uniform on, and continue accomplishing the mission unless we are dragged away from it. And that's what we did. And it really did change the narrative, even though we knew that we still might lose our opportunity to serve at any point. But it was still our chance to change those hearts and minds because every day is an opportunity to meet someone new and to shatter those stereotypes we talked about. The more time we have, the more people we interact with because we have that opportunity to be open, the better. The more we change, but the more the mission continues and we are stronger for it by having a diverse, talented force.
So you were just simply relying on, hey, let me show you what I got. Let me show you that of what we bring to the table. Didn't miss a beat. And I mean, you're still here now. So clearly, that grit, hanging in there and not letting it really get to your head and break you down, you just kept showing up. I think there's a lot of strength in just showing up. You change someone's mind doing that, right? I mean, when I think back to like my worst times in life, I wasn't showing up. That was missing. And the strongest points in my life, no matter what, I was always present. I was always there. So I think, for you to just keep showing up is that speaks volumes. There's a lot of bravery just in that act itself.
And it certainly wasn't just me. I think a lot of us drew a collective strength, knowing that there were thousands of us in this together. And for anyone who feels alone in that situation, that is an order of magnitude increase in burden. So it's about building those communities to know that I'm not the only one going through this. There are others, and we all can make a difference for one another by sharing our strength in those most difficult times.
Absolutely. Which is a perfect transition point here to coping with adversity. This will be our last topic here. I know you are no stranger to adversity. And so I would love to, hear some of your strategies on dealing with the adversity.
We just hit one of those big ones, which is about finding that community that gives you strength and realizing that your story is not one that is you. Well, while it's uniquely yours, there are aspects that you often share with other people who you can find bonds that matter so much to getting through difficult moments. But it's so much about having those personal reasons too, your personal why. You mentioned Simon Sinek, and his clear thing was all about finding your why. And that is so important for any of us, both as individuals and as leaders, in terms of being resilient. Why do we serve? Why do we want to put the uniform on one more day? Or 10 more days or 10 more years. That is incredibly important. And for me, finding that why kind of intersected in some ways. Now, I had my why. I wanted to be a technologist. I wanted to help humanity advance in the stars. I wanted to be part of something larger than myself, and that is why I served. But then finding an additional why of I want to take care of this community. I want to create these developmental environments where we make sure that everyone has a, a place. I want to knock down those barriers that are still out there for people and use the tools that I've developed to make it easier for those that follow. That has become my why and what keeps me so resilient because I get stories back or I get thank yous that, hey, you did this thing and now I get to go do that. And I'm like, yes, that's amazing. Or I give a talk at an air show about why resilient or why inclusion matters and what LGBTQ people have done in the history and military. And I'll get a 16-year-old come up to me afterwards and say, I never knew this was a possibility for me. You've opened my eyes. And those moments where you just see possibility bloom in someone else's eyes, that's amazing. So paying it forward, staying resilient, thinking about what can we do for that next generation? That's my why.
And I think that's beautiful. And think about your perspective. I mean, you've seen everything from don't ask, don't tell to being able to be trans to taking it back to being able to, I mean, the grit and resiliency just that you've built. I love that you, at your rank, at your position, with your history, that you can help others that are brand new. Because, like you said, you have a track record. A lot of these folks don't have that, and so to have someone like you at the forefront, showing them the way and how to be comfortable in their own skin, and showing that it's even possible, right? Like breaking the glass ceiling is just, I mean, it's huge.
And at some point, my career will end. But the thing I will then take the most pride in is seeing someone go further than I did. Because if there's one compliment I think anyone ever pays that I really take to heart, and I think anyone should, is if you're called a trailblazer, it's not about what you did or where you made it to in your career. But that notion of being a trailblazer is all about the fact that along the way, You paved the road behind you. You chopped down the trees. You knocked over the obstacles so that the people that are following you get to where you made it to and have the energy to go further. That's what it's all about. And then we'll get to celebrate all the amazing things they're doing to make it even easier for that next generation.
And that's how change works. So with adversity, I also want to talk about because people ask me all the time because I make all sorts of, social media and I'm creating content constantly, putting my thoughts out there constantly. And, that comes with some risk of how people might interpret that. Do they want to poke fun at me? A lot of people that don't want me to do what I'm doing, they will say some nasty things occasionally. So I get asked all the time, hey, Josh, how do you, deal with that? How do you deal with the haters? Uh, and I know you get asked that a lot too. I would assume you get that type of attention way more than I would, being a much smaller minority, with, being trans. That has to add a whole nother layer to this. And so I know there's other trans folks out there that are dealing with like internet bullying and some nasty things being said. You're no stranger to that. And I was hoping you could kind of talk about how someone can deal with that negative space because it does exist.
It is a challenging environment to navigate. And one of the things I always tell people is take care of yourself. You don't have to live in that world. Go for a hike, climb a mountain, ride a bike, read a book, see a movie. Take the time to recharge your own batteries. Just like any flight attendant will tell you, put your own oxygen mask on first. You don't have to live in the world of the comments. But in many cases, you can ignore it. In some cases, you can laugh at it. Some of the emails or text messages or social media chat things that I get are laughably funny. And it's when they're actually in good English that I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty interesting. In fact, my wife made me save one email that I got that claimed I pissed on people's legs and then lauded the beautiful rainbows. And I'm like, that's amazing. You are, give me some great metaphor like that, and I will read your hate mail all day long. But most of them are so disconnected or have bad grammar that you just sometimes laugh at it. But in many cases, what I draw strength from in some of that, especially when like video clips of me start going viral in circles where it's mostly about trying to make fun of me, I'm proud of those clips that they're showing. And if that means 20,000 more people saw that, even if 19,980 of them were like, oh, this is crazy. There are 20 people that just saw that video and like, wow, I just learned something. Or again, they might be that one person that said, oh, this could be me. I'm not alone. I can still have a career in the military or in space career fields and be trans or be queer. And so getting that representation out there matters. And I take a lot of solace in that, that even when my image, my voice, whatever is going around in circles where the primary point is not, look how wonderful this is, someone is seeing that and taking something out of it.
Wow. That's beautiful. I did not expect you to word it that way, but the fact that you were able to take that and spin it still into a positive, I think is just a testament to your grit, your character, your optimism, and what you bring to the table is just huge. Being a trailblazer, I kind of feel like I'm one for podcasting in the military. I've taken a lot of hits because trailblazers take hits, right? And I took a lot of hits for the greater good because I know it's the right thing to do. And so, but you as a trailblazer, that's like a whole another level of trailblazing. And so I have the highest respect for you with everything you're about, with what you bring to the table, the way that you're able to craft these stories and highlight these people. Even when I asked what your proudest moment was, it was about your team's success. You didn't bring up anything about yourself. You went straight to the moment your team won all these awards. So, you're changing hearts and minds. You're doing some amazing things. And I just wanted to thank you, as an airman, to have leaders like you who are leading from the front, who are showing us what right looks like. And I just want to take a minute to tell you thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. It truly remains an honor and a pleasure to serve. And despite all evidence to the contrary, somehow it feels like it's closer to the beginning than the end because I love what I do. I love the people I get to work with. And I love the opportunity we have right now to shatter some of those stereotypes and make it better for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I was hoping you could end with just kind of how to find you, where to get your book, and any final thought that you have.
Yeah, you can find me at my website, breefram.com. The book, Forging Queer Leaders, is available anywhere books are sold. And you can find our podcast, Forged in Fire, anywhere that you get your podcast, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music. Great opportunity to connect. And I am all across social media, so I am not I am not hard to find.
I found your website right away. I was very impressed by it. It's a very nice website.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So as a fellow veteran airman, fellow podcaster, and hopefully one day author, hopefully, I just want to thank you for coming on Hero Front, being vulnerable and really spreading the love and kindness and perspective that you have. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank anyone who's still listening to the very end. This was the hero's journey of Bree Fram.